Before you jumped on, Noel and I had a really awesome conversation about Renter's Warehouse. Again, great guys, love what they're doing. And we also talked a little bit about college towns and investing in college towns and college cities. Is this a trend that you expect to continue over time? Is this something that I should be looking at personally investing in? What am I missing here? You had a chance to read it.
You're missing nothing. I did, and I love it. I have been for the last several years waiting to see niche strategies by large investors. Okay, something that the biggest investors in the country are clients of ours. Okay, so your audience might not be aware that what OwnAmerica does is we're a marketplace platform for rental properties. We serve big Wall Street backed investors and a very rapidly growing group of mid-sized and more small investors. And one of my favorite things is to look at what the big people are doing that can be shown to the smaller people and say, hey, look, you can get benefit out of some of the innovations and the approach that they've created. And so all the data on the website, all the measurement techniques, the calculators, the projections are all based upon our work with institutions. But it goes the other direction too. There are a lot of things that I've learned from small investors over the years that I'm trying to share with the large investors because, listen, just not for nothing. Sometimes they need to be reminded that they're not the only smart people in the world. Sometimes these small entrepreneurial level people are very ingenious in the way they go about things. And so for years now, there's been basically a dozen major metro markets: Atlanta, Charlotte, Tampa, Orlando, Jacksonville, Dallas, Nashville. These were the cities that all the big investors went into. And they almost all bought pretty much the same kind of houses, 3 bedrooms, 2 baths, pretty much the same age, built since 1980, pretty much the same thing. They were all going after the same up the middle strategy, right? Why be creative? If you're the first one in the land grab, just go buy the easiest stuff to buy, easiest stuff to own, that has the broadest appeal to tenants and families that want to rent. But what we always wondered is, when you look at other categories of real estate, and multifamily is kind of the kissing cousin to single family homes, multifamily years ago started to get niche. They started to get diverse on their strategies. And one of the things they did luxury, right? So luxury apartment buildings. They did student housing. And that's where this article jumped off for me. I said, okay, now we're starting to see it where people are beginning to recognize that in these certain towns that have an anchor, the anchor's been around for 75 years. It's got a big endowment. It's a university. It's got a transient population of renters. Not that many sophomores are buying their house for their junior year, right? They're going to rent. The sophomore who is going to put a hole in the wall, but he's not responsible to pay the rent. Mom and dad are paying the rent. And so it's got to really, yes, don't do the granite countertops. Don't do the crown moldings. Paint over the holes because these things are going to get banged up. I'm exaggerating, but you're not buying it for luxury clientele, but they are paying on time, and they are making sure that junior little Bobby doesn't get evicted because the rent doesn't get paid. But you also have a play, like you can see when endowments get a boost. You can see colleges get higher rankings. Okay, like the article that I'm sure you'll link to on thinkrealty.com, it was from homes.com. It was a blog piece about a U.S. landlord index. And I thought it was fascinating because it begins to say, okay, so here's a college, but not all colleges are the same. There might be a college that won a national championship. You know what happens when a college wins a national championship? Every kid in the country applies there. And so that's just demand. We always talk about the same thing. It's about show me where the lift is. If there's a place that is bedrock, it's anchored by an employer and a population base like a university. A lot of students wind up staying in the city where they went to college. That's part of the research. If it's a city kids come in and they leave and they never come back, that's different than when 25% of the students end up anchoring themselves there and they stay put. Austin's an example. I don't know their percentage, but Austin's an example of where you buy in a place where there's universities and nobody ever wants to leave because they figured out Austin's the coolest city in America, right?
That's
or at
right.
least for them. So that's kind of the idea. Diversity of strategy. Learn to go in as a niche. The big investors are starting to think this way, but not really in mass right now. And so it's still a really, really good opportunity for a nimble entrepreneur to get in there and take positions.
I know a lot of foreign buyers, foreign investors will always use universities as an anchor. of where they're going to buy properties. I speak internationally, and I'm generally headed to Shanghai once a year to connect with folks and to connect with investors. And that's what they look at, right? They're like, hey, you're next to Emory? Okay, nice. What 500 unit apartment complex can I buy? It makes sense, right? They want more stable markets, and they want mommy and daddy.
And they also know it.
Yeah.
There's familiarity with that.
Absolutely.
There's familiarity. One of the things you see a lot with overseas investors is that they send their kids here for college. They buy a piece of property for the kid to live in while they're here. They usually like gateway cities, New York, Miami, San Francisco. They're like big brand name cities. But if they get to know a university because a child goes there, now they come to the U.S. for Parents Weekend. They come to the U.S. for graduation day. They're there several times. They may not know anything but Miami, New York, and San Francisco and whatever town Emory is in because they happen to go there. They get comfortable. And one of the things that happens all the time with overseas investors, they don't get to own property the way we get to own property. Okay, it's different over there. There are countries that these folks come from where they earned a lot of wealth, but there's a history in those countries of seizing private wealth. They have a motivation to get money out. It isn't like if you don't like the outcome of the election in this country, you get mad for 4 years. If you don't like the outcome of a change in power in some countries, you actually have to fear for your family's legacy to be taken away. And so they want to bring the money here. Real estate is something they're very comfortable with, and college towns are places that can draw their attention just because that's where their kids checked out going to school and maybe went to school.
No, that's right. And I think it's a smart play, right? It's more stable. Mommy and daddy generally will co-sign, and they're going to pay rent because they definitely don't want Junior Bobby to fail out and not pay rent and then all of a sudden be distracted. That just is not a good look for Johnny not being able to graduate. Sorry. So in terms of yield, right? In terms of yield in this article, there's I feel only half the story being told, and I think you and I were talking a little bit about that.
Yeah,
right?
I agree with you. This is a really well-written story. I liked it a lot, but there was something that jumped out at me, and that is they ranked it based upon yield, but they did not define what yield was. And so, for example, in the top 10 ranking, the highest yielding market was 14%, and the lowest yielding was 10. Now, in terms of the top 10. These are gross yields, and I want this helps me to as a jumping off point to make sure that your audience knows that there are not really that many standards that have been widely spread in the single family investing space, meaning the definition of yield, this is gross yield. What does gross yield mean? You collect the rent, and of all the rent you collect, what percentage of the price of the property is that?
That's
right.
So
if you have a 10% gross yield, that means that if the house is worth $100,000, you're getting 10 grand worth of rent, but you still have to pay your taxes.
Right. And it doesn't include expenses at all. Right. It makes no sense to me why those numbers aren't accounted for.
It's a good rule of thumb. It's a good way to rank. The reason why they use it is they don't have the expenses. We know the expenses because we're in the trenches. They didn't know the expenses well enough to tell you that if you're going to get 10% as a gross yield, you're going to probably spend about 4% on your taxes, your insurance, your maintenance, your property management. It's going to leave you with a net yield of 6%. Okay? 6% is the net yield that you can actually spend the money, right? Like, so you're putting $100,000 down.
That's your net yield. That's your net yield. Yeah.
Right. So now here's the best part is that it ends up making its way back to 10 because in Baltimore, Maryland, which is number 10 on the ranking, the 10% yield minus 4 points of expenses gives you 6, but Baltimore appreciates at like 5% a year on average for the last 20 years. So you get back to 11. So it's wrong, but it ends up being right. It's a good rule of thumb, but you're not going to pocket that yield. You have to understand that net yield is what you can actually collect and keep, and then appreciation, the value of the property going up, is what you add to that for the total wealth picture.